This was my last router fence I made about 15 years ago. I got rid of my old router cabinet and had plans for a router fence on my table saw, but it's been on the back burner for many years. While this one works really well with my table saw extension, it can be easily added to any router table. One feature that I've added, which I think that all router fences should have, is the ability to use profiles for router bits. Today we're going to build this router fence, and I think you'll be surprised by how easy it is to build. Just like all of my other projects, we're going to keep this as simple as we can. You'll need a few essential things like a dust port, the T-track, plus the knobs and the bolts that go with the T-track. Many stores sell 24-inch by 48-inch sheets of 3/4-inch plywood, which is more than enough for both the base and the fence itself. I may add other items as we go along, such as screws, but these are the core materials that you're going to need. For a complete list, you can visit the website, which is linked in the description. And I will add that I made it really simple with the knobs, the port, and the T-track. You just have to click on the links and it'll take you straight to Amazon. The first thing that we're going to do is create the base that our fence is going to attach to. I do need to make a point here that this is the top and the bottom of my base, as well as the walls that will hold the base together. The length of this is going to be 32 inches, which is where I'm going to cut my length off right now. I have 6 walls that will fit on this, 2 on the ends and 4 in the middle. Before I split this in half, I want to make sure that I make each of those dado tracks. That way it's easier later on to put it all back together. I will raise my blade 3/8 of an inch, and really quick tip, just use a 3/8 drill bit to do that. I'll create rabbets on both ends now. I'm going to move my sled forward, and I'll set this edge over my blade. And now I can set my stop block so that it bumps up right next to the edge. The next track that I'm going to make is at 5 7/8 from the ends. So like before, I want to make sure that my blade lines up to my 5 7/8 on the other side. I'll go ahead and make my first cut, flip it around and make the second cut, and then we're going to stop. I need to make my second cut in now. What I'm going to do is take my cutoff piece, put it right on the end of this cut that I made earlier, and I'll use a kiradashi knife to make a mark. I'll come in now to 11 7/8, and I need to make a mark at 12 3/8. And now it's just a matter of hogging it all out. We're going to cut this in half as well as the piece that we cut off earlier. Now we'll cut these off at 4 3/4 of an inch. When I go to put this together, I've got 3 pieces that work. I've got my 2 ends, I've got my piece over here. These are just a little tight. They will fit, but I don't want to force anything. I want this to come together and be square all the way across. The way to fix a problem like this, we're just going to use a sander. Now, as you can see, it's easy to push these together. I haven't done anything more than just adding a little bit of sanding to it, but that is looking really good. I do want to make sure that these all line up later on. So I'm going to go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 7 at the end. There are a couple ways that we can attach this to the fence. The first way is just to use clamps. What that's going to involve is drilling a hole through the side of these end pieces here that's going to be at the right height as our fence so that we can put this in and clamp it down. Again, that's going to be on the end pieces because in the center we're going to have our dust port. The second way, and the way that I think I'm going to go, is by using a fence clamp. I've made a few videos of these in the past, and I'll have a link in the description so that you can watch it if you're interested in it. Basically, the way that this works is the same as a clamp. It's going to come in here like this, fit into a hole just like the clamp would, and then I can tighten it down, which will get me pressed up against my fence. So what I need to do now is move this in, and I'll put it at an angle like this. If it's up too high, obviously it won't clamp down here. So I need to move this at an angle and then set it in here where I think it's going to be in a good spot. I'm going to come in here and just make a mark. At this point, it should be obvious that this is going to be our top. I want to make sure that I don't get these mixed up later on. I've got walls 2 and 5 here, and I'm going to go ahead and drill a hole through each one of these at 1.5 inches. Holes are drilled now, and all I need to do is add my clamp and tighten down. Now, one thing that you might notice when you do this is that the entire thing might try to lift up a little bit, and that would be because of the hole. You're going to want to go in there and round out the hole so that it's not pressing on it and causing it to turn. Hopefully, if you've done it right, you will have drilled through the center and shouldn't have that problem, but that would be a way to fix it if you did. One thing I did add was another hole here, and that's to use my fence clamp here. Again, I'm not sure that I like this. It tends to pull up a little bit like this, so I might have to play with it a little bit, but that's the other option if you wanted to do that. The next thing that we need to do before we can actually glue this all up is we need to worry about the dust port. If you're doing yours and you're not going to use the fence, then really you can skip this because this will clamp like this and it works perfectly. But obviously with mine, I can't do that, so I have to flip it like this, and it does hit the fence, so I need to be really careful about how I place this on here. What I need to do now is cut out a part of this so that this will fit right over the top and not bump into this. So what I'm going to do is bring this forward until it just touches the dust port. I want to make sure that these are all kind of inside of the slots that they need to be in. And then I'm going to bring a pencil in here from the edge. I'm going to make a mark like this. So right there and right there is what I need to worry about for the diameter of my dust port. It's not going to be here, it's going to be in the back. So I need to make sure that I carry those lines across to the back. And I'll use a square and move those lines across. Once I have that now, I can come to the underside and mark where it hits, the point where it hits. I want to cut this out with a bandsaw or even maybe a hole saw, but if you're not interested in doing that, you can always put this on a sled and then cut up to that line and just make a series of cuts to clean this out. With my dust port in here, I need to come back here and draw some lines so I know where to attach this. I made 4 holes in this by coming in 5/8 of an inch on each side and drilling each of these holes out. I used an awl first and then an 11/64 twist bit to drill these out. Stay away from brad point bits as they will crack the plastic if you use them. I'll line this up to the marks that I made earlier and make sure that I'm centered on here. I can come in here now and just mark the holes. I will be using 4 number 6 3/4 inch screws, so I'm going to be using a 3/32 drill bit to drill each of these holes out. Finally, before attaching this and then gluing this all down, I need to cut out a little bit of an opening here for the router bits later on. This is a judgment call. You can make it as big as you want to make yours. I think I'm going to find the widest diameter router bit and go a little bit bigger and then cut it out according to that. And I'm not going to go in too far. I'll probably go in maybe about 1.5 inches. Now I can just easily add the screws to the dust port and we're done. And now it's just a matter of gluing this up. We'll come back after this is dried. With the base built, we're pretty much halfway done with this. You could just run your stock across the face of this and you might be okay with that. But if you're doing smaller things, that's where you're going to have a problem. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a couple fences here that I can slide open and close that'll allow me to give me that space that I need for different size widths of my bits. In order to do that, I'm going to take the second piece of plywood here and I'm going to cut it to length as well as the height of this plus 3/4 of an inch because I need to attach it to another piece on the top. Looks like my fence comes to 5.5 inches, so I'm going to add 3/4 of an inch and make it 6.25 inches. Now we cut this piece off so that we could focus on the off cut from that piece. And this is what's going to actually ride along the track. What I want to do with this piece is I want to have a 3/4 inch gap between the fence and my T-track, and then the 3/4 inch track, and then about 3/4 of an inch on the other side. So that means that I need to cut out a gap on this piece here that will fit that T-track. We're going to make this easy by bringing our track over here, and we're going to lower this You could go a little bit higher, and I think I will, just by a hair. Because I've already got my track here, I'll go ahead and place this up against the blade and then move my fence over. And that's good right there. Now I'm gonna make one cut, I'm gonna flip it and do the other side because I wanna have two pieces all together from this one single piece. I'm actually going to move my blade in this way. So I'm gonna start with two tracks in here. And then as I said, I'm gonna be moving the fence this way. I'm only explaining this so that it makes sense when you see it. And that fits in there nice and smooth, but we can go ahead and split this in half now. Back here at the table, I've got the knobs that I recommend, this little packet here. They actually come with 4 knobs altogether, and I plan on adding 2 on each side. What I'm gonna do now is I'm gonna put these together and make sure that they were cut right so they have the exact spacing on one side. I found that if I move this in about 4 inches, my T-track, the holes right here will line up about 4 inches away either side. So 4 inches on this side, and I'll line up right here. I've got a 3/16 twist bit here, not a brad point bit, because I want this to fit right inside the hole. You might want to mark this with an awl just to make it a little bit more clear. Before we attach the arms to the top and the track to the top, we need to cut this to size. I'm just going to come to the end here. We'll need to cut our fence in half. 32 inches cut in half at 16 inches, which is what I'm cutting this at. I'll set my marking gauge at 3/8 of an inch, which is half the thickness of the plywood that I will be drilling into. I'll be using number 6 by 1 1/4 inch screws, and I'll pre-drill with a 3/32 inch drill bit. To flex out any bend that might be in the plywood, I'm just going to add some clamps. Now I'll clamp this to the front piece, and we'll use a 3/32 drill bit to drill the rest of the way into the other plywood, because if we don't do this, it's going to split. To attach the track, I'm going to balance the T-bar inside so that it's centered with the base, and I'm just going to pull one of these forward enough that I can see a screw hole. Again, I'm going to make sure that that stays centered on my base. I'm going to add a clamp on this side as well as on this side. Actually, I think I'm going to add one on both ends. I'll move the fence down again until I find the next hole right there, and I can clamp this up again. And I'll do that all the way across until I get all my screws in. Now we'll just add the bolts, add the handles, and we're done. To use this is pretty self-explanatory. When we want to use this, we're going to add this to the router table. On the back side, we'll add our clamps. Of course, you'll want to have your dust port right in the center of your bit. Besides our fences being right next to each other and not bumping into each other, the next thing that we really need to worry about is whether or not the table is at a 90 with the tabletop. If I grab a square and put it against the fence, you can see that I'm off by just a little bit on the top, and that's not good at all. I don't know if it's the fence that's having a problem or if the tabletop is not parallel with the other tabletop, but we can fix this by adding shims to the back. So I'll loosen this up a little bit, add a shim. Again, you can see that there's just a little bit of a gap. If I loosen my clamp up and push that down, it's virtually disappeared now, which is what I want. I can tighten my clamp down, and I'm ready to go with this. At this point, if this is a common problem for you, like it might be for me, you might consider cutting your shim and then just attaching it to the back. The next thing that we'll focus on is how to space this with our bit. So if I bring this in here, and let's say I want to make a beading that is about half the distance of my router bit. So I'll bring it in at half, and then if I bring this forward, I just want to make sure that it's not going to hit the actual bit itself. And then I tighten down and I can use it from here. The beauty of having a bearing is that you can run your stock across it without having to worry about having any kind of setup like this at all. But let's say you want to move your board vertically like this. This is when you really need to have a fence, as it's not safe trying to move it across the router bit like this. We're going to move this forward, open this up like we normally would with the other one. I'm going to move this in here. Then I can take the bearing and press it up against a straight edge, and then my fence against it, and then I can lock everything down. And that's how you can easily use this to route something that's vertical like this. Now, this is really the basic way to use the fence, but we can add a couple features to this to make this just a little bit better. Now, the first thing that we can do is we can add a T-track, and this will allow us to add stops on our fence. If I want to run my stock through and then stop at a certain point, this will allow me to do that. You go to the website, the T-track that I have in the list is actually a pair of T-tracks. So if you want to add a stop to your fence, you're already going to have the second piece that came with the first one. The first thing that we need to do is take all the knobs and the bolts out of your fence. I've set my blade so that it's 3/8 of an inch above the table, and it really needs to be pretty close to 3/8 of an inch, as the fence is 3/4 of an inch thick and our track is 3/8 of an inch. And our screws are about 3/8 of an inch as well. We want to make sure that when we add the screws, we're not going to drill through the other side, if at all possible. You need to decide where you want to put the T-track on this, although I do recommend it to be a little bit higher, as if you are planning on using like a featherboard in the future, it'll make it a lot easier for that. Since I had a little bit of a mistake right here, I'm going to run mine right across here to cut this out. Again, I'm at 3/8 right here, and I'm going to move my fence so that I'm about 1/4 of an inch away from the inside here. I'll make a pass with each one and then move my fence, and we'll just do this a little bit at a time. And this fits snug, which is what we want compared to the T-track that we use for the fence. Now we just need to cut this to size and screw it on. There are other things that you could do with this setup, like using box and dovetail jigs. But one feature I believe every router fence should have is the ability to create router bit profiles. This is especially useful for ensuring repeatability even after you've removed a bit. To address this, I've designed a removable section that allows for this kind of functionality. It uses inexpensive hardboard, so you can make several of these in advance and have them when you need them. To build this add-on, I first attached an arm that matches the others to a fence piece cut from the same plywood used for the rest of the fence. I marked 1/2 inch from each side of the plywood and 1/2 inch from the bottom, along with a few inches from the top. Then I drilled these points at the drill press using a 1/4 inch brad point bit. Next, I used a table saw to cut a section out of my fence that would allow my hardboard to fit in there perfectly. My design only requires a 3-inch wide piece of hardboard. Be sure this piece is flush with the rest of the fence. This part is critical for accuracy. You can cut this part out with a bandsaw, or if you don't have one, a coping saw will work just fine. When it's time to use the add-on, I attach a 3-inch by 5-inch piece of hardboard to the front of the fence, clamp it down, and mark the back. Then I drill the holes with a 1/4 inch bit and countersink them. The piece can be fastened with nuts on the back. You might choose to avoid the bottom bolts completely, but that's entirely up to you. Thanks so much for sticking around to the end. If you leave a comment, please make sure to thank my patrons who make all of this possible, including the website. Without them, I could not keep it going. And remember to keep making things.